going live any moment now. Brilliant.
Okay.
Great.
Well, we've doubled in numbers.
Yeah, no, it sometimes does that. But how are you, Michael? Are you well? How's things out in Chianti?
I'm well. The weather's been really nice for us to finish picking olives and making olive oil, and we've seeded cover crops and composted, put some composted cow manure out and some cover crops. So yeah, we've been pretty lucky. It hasn't rained too much. We actually have snow in the forecast coming up pretty soon. So
Really?
Okay.
very unlikely, I think. Used to snow quite regularly, but now it's getting a little bit too mild in our winters, as it is around the world.
Mm.
Yeah, sure.
It would be great to have a good winter. I actually think I have a picture. Yeah, this was a picture I took somewhere, I think around 2006 or 2008. This kind of coverage is pretty rare nowadays, but this is fantastic for the vineyards. It freezes the topsoil and kind of keeps the tignola, light brown apple moth, in check, and kind of breaks up the soil and makes space for water and air.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we just don't get that kind of snow anymore. It'd be lucky if it even sticks these days when it comes down. So
It's a terrific photograph, Michael.
thank you. Thank you.
It's like something out of a Russian movie.
Exactly. But I thought it looked kind of like Siberia or something. When
Yeah, if they grow vines in Siberia.
Like Chianti. This is what Chianti looks like to me. So you have vineyards and olives. This is right directly across from Monte Bernardi. Very steep, very, very diverse, beautiful landscape. So.
Can we spend our next lockdown there with you, Michael?
Do you have a guest house?
Yes.
With Wi-Fi.
It's quite quiet. But yeah, I enjoy it.
I bet. Where were you living in the States before you moved to California? Were you in?
So I never lived in California. I'm American, born in Italy. We traveled a lot from my father's career. After Italy, we moved to France. I had a brother born in France, and then we settled in Michigan for 10 straight years. And then my father's job moved us to Germany, and I went to high school in Germany and finished at an international school near Frankfurt.
Okay.
When I was there, I got into food and started cooking in a local restaurant, an Italian restaurant. And, started washing dishes, prep cook, line cook, and worked my way up and kind of followed that path. And then when I finished high school, I went to Le Cordon Bleu in my university breaks and did a cuisine and pastry degree at Le Cordon Bleu. And that's where I got to also go to wineries on the weekends as part of the course. It was extracurricular. You had to sign up for it, but every other weekend we'd go to a different region of France and meet makers. So it was so amazing. It made me start to think more about winemaking, and I
think you've certainly whet our appetite, Michael. So I think we should begin. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Thornton Hunt's last virtual wine tour of this year. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Alistair, and I look after Italy for Thornton Hunt. And we had an amazing tasting in my garden in the awkward months of the summer when we tasted Michael's entire range pretty much. And it was a no-brainer. So we're delighted that he's agreed to work with us. And I'm very pleased to introduce Michael Schmelzer, who will talk us through Monte Bernardi and the wines and the place mix. And please do use the chat button at the bottom to give us any comments. Emma, Charlie, and I will field them and pass them on to Michael. And if we can't get an answer to you tonight, we'll send you his answers after the show at some point during the week. Anyway, Michael, welcome to Thornton Hunt's virtual wine tasting.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Alistair,
Salute.
Charlie, and Emma. It's a pleasure to join you, and not just this evening, but also to Thorman Hunt Portfolio. It's an honor and a pleasure, and I look forward to growing it and meeting you in person and working with you in person, because everything's been virtual up to this point. So
Absolutely.
I look forward to it very much. Yeah, so a little introduction about me. I've been in Panzano in Chianti now. I just finished my 18th harvest at Monte Bernardi. I'll back it up a little bit. We started to talk a little bit about it before we started the chat, but I have a background that started with a passion for cooking. Went to Le Cordon Bleu in Paris and studied cuisine and pastry, and eventually got into wine through that, meeting winemakers on the weekends as part of the course, and started to learn how complex winemaking and wine production was, learning about fruit spectrums and how soils and climate affect wine. It really grabbed me and started to pull me in a different direction than food. So after I graduated from an undergraduate degree in Colorado and finished my cuisine and pastry grand diplome at Le Cordon Bleu, I went to Australia and studied winemaking and viticulture. And roughly a year or two into the program, my parents started thinking about their retirement. They were in Germany, where I finished high school. I had a brother in California. I was in Australia, and my sister was in another part of Germany, in Berlin. And they and my sister really schemed this idea that if they found a property with some vineyards, that her and I could make a business out of it, and my parents could enjoy having 2 out of the 3 kids nearby. So we searched for a property for another 2 or 3 years, mostly in France and Italy, the places that we knew well from growing up. We found an amazing place in Panzano in Chianti, which is Monte Bernardi. It's the photo that you see there in the background. It's a very historic place, founded in 1085, 52 hectares of land. But when we took over in early 2000s, it was 5 hectares of vineyards. Up until that point, basically until the late 60s, it was part of a mezzadria contadino kind of structure, with one family that owned many other estates, called the Bonsegni family from Florence. This is the book that they kept all of the operations, track of all the operations and who did them. So all the different farms, by name of the farmer, and all the different things they grew, the fava, the fagioli, the grapes, the potatoes, the orzo, olive oil, everything is listed meticulously in this book by hand, and then divided in half between the farmer and the landowner, the Bonsegni family. And they had quite a few farms. I think it was a total of about 13 farms that made up this kind of portfolio owned by this padrone landowner. And up until the late 80s, it kind of just carried on through passing hand to hand to other estates locally, until the owners previous to us established a label and started making wines under the name Monte Bernardi. So even though it was established in 1085, the first wines weren't produced under the name Monte Bernardi until 1992. So when we came to Monte Bernardi, what I really realized is that where we are, this is an aerial photo of Monte Bernardi. This curve here is actually called the belly button of Chianti Classico. It's supposed to be exactly the center of Chianti Classico. I'll show you another picture. So Florence is over here in the corner here, and Siena is down in the corner here, and Monte Bernardi's here, right here, that red dot that you can see a little bit. All the light blue is Panzano here. But when you look at this, what you want to see really is that it's such an enormous region. It's 8,000 hectares of vineyards from north to south. And in this huge region, there's so much diversity. You have the sandy, soft rolling hills of San Casciano up here, and the soft rolling clay soils of Castelnuovo, Berendenga, and Gaioli down here. But the part here in the center is really the steep backbone, rocky soil area where we find ourselves as well. And the more you come toward the center, parts of Rada, parts of Panzano, Lamale, and parts of Gaioli is where you have this huge drop in temperature, steep slopes, rocky soils. And what I realized when I came there is that it was a very unique part of Chianti Classico, and you could make very perfumed, aromatic, and elegant wines in this part of Chianti Classico. So from day one, I've tried to really bring that out in our wines, bring out that freshness and elegance. So to me, that meant moving back to more traditional winemaking styles, big barrels, cement, longer aging, using only traditional grape varieties, no fining, no filtration. So that's a bit of an introduction of what we've been doing here at Monte Bernardi.
Great, thank you, Mike. Thank you. I would say that I think what you're doing, what you're trying to do with the wines you're achieving, because the thing that we most remarked upon that day we spent tasting them was the absolute purity and freshness of them. And maybe now would be a good time to have a look at the retromarcia, which somebody tells me means reverse gear in Italian as well.
That's right, yeah. That was a choice, a name that I chose because I wanted to say that we were going back to traditional kind of mentality and philosophy. It's sort of like what we touched on with the old book. Well, we don't, in this era, you know, the old farmer used to do practices that we take for granted now, really. And when the transition happened between the old contadino and the landowner transition to the new kind of more modern way we grow grapes and make wine now, there was a lot of changes. And to explain that better, the properties like Monte Bernardi that were on this side, there was, let's say, 13 wineries or 13 farms owned by this family. When the Mezzadria ended, all these individual farms, Monte Bernardi, Candaiale, Il Palagio, Le Cincole, they were all sold off individually. So a lot of them were sold off to Italians, or sometimes also to foreigners like Central Europeans and potentially Americans. But the thing to really pay attention to is that they were sold to non-farmers, to people coming from other industries that didn't really have agricultural backgrounds. So this, from the late 60s, early 70s on to now, we've really seen a loss of the knowledge of the old farmer competence. And it's my passion to bring those things back, not only because they're kind of more natural, more organic, but I also think we can make better wines by doing it. So an example of this, which applies to Retromarcia, but also to all of the other wines, is when we're growing our canopy in our vineyard, let's say, I'll show you a picture. When the vines grow up on the vine, they grow up to the top trellis, and most people, modern producers, they hedge trim them. They cut the tips off. It's very quick. It aesthetically looks really nice and tidy, But an old farmer would never do that. They would take the time to wrap the shoots along the top wire. So this is an example of it. I don't know how easy it is to tell, but instead of hedge trimming, we take the time, and in Italian we say braiding. We actually take the time and we wrap them along the top. And any farmer in the 60s would have done that without even thinking. They would never have thought to cut it with a knife or their scissors. And modern wineries say, oh, well, that's because they didn't have the technology, but obviously it would have been faster for them to cut it with a knife or scissors than it would to take the time to braid it. If you ask an old farmer, why did you take the time to braid it and wrap it? They would say, if I didn't, the grapes wouldn't mature. And the reason behind this, they didn't have the knowledge really what was happening, but what I learned it was happening is when the shoots come up and you take off the tip, you're essentially taking the head off a climber. The climbers grow from the tips. So the new leaves come from the tips. They don't come from the base or anything. So when you cut it off, you're essentially telling a climber it can no longer climb. So what happens is it shoots the side shoots, which we call lateral shoots or feminine shoots. And that throws off the whole balance of my canopy. So I would not have light, air coming in there. So already it's making it harder for me to farm organically or biodynamically. So we get too much humidity in there. The airflow wouldn't pass through. It wouldn't dry out. And it would be more difficult to mature our bunches. But something that I learned after a few years of doing that is that I got an even more important advantage by taking the time wrapping. And that is when we have shoots, when they're, they have just started in the spring, they're green. And as we go towards harvest, they turn brown. This ripening in the cane is the same ripening in the skins, the seeds, and the stems. So if you hedge trim, you shoot all these side shoots out. Well, those have to be ripened as well. So you're putting more work on the plant to ripen before it switches over to mature the grape bunch. So what it means is in the end, you have to wait longer to pick your bunches. Your sugars go up, your acidity goes down, and you often don't get the quality of the tannins that you're looking for. So just taking something so simple as wrapping the shoots that was absolutely uniform throughout the region, throughout Italy, it's something that almost no one does anymore. That's a great example of one of the lost practices that really means a lot and should be kind of brought back.
And Michael, just leaping into that before tasting the first wine, there's a question here about essentially what you were just saying about kind of the ways in which kind of it was previously seen. It used to be seen as traditional, but now it's seen as kind of going. Then there was modern, but now it's kind of going back to tradition, which I almost see as well also as the new modern in a way, that everyone is more and more going back to basics. And the question is essentially that it's you hear a lot about it happening in France. Do you think there's a similar kind of movement in Italy to more going back to basics?
Yeah, I think there is a movement in the cellar to move away from barrique and new oak. I think more of a movement to use non-traditional grapes in a lot of ways. But I think often there's a lack of value and weight given to the vineyard still. A lot of wineries will have winemaking consultants, but they might not have agronomists, or their agronomists might come from a region far away from Chianti Classico, and they might apply ideas and concepts that don't make sense. To give you an example, in the last 30 years, one rootstock has pretty much dominated all of the plantings in Chianti Classico. And it's a rootstock that doesn't make any sense on paper or in the vineyard. It's a rootstock that comes from France, and it doesn't like calcareous soils. It doesn't like heat stress. It doesn't like waterlogging. So essentially, if you plant Sangiovese on this rootstock in our very rocky soils, which I'd like to actually also show you, it's like planting them in a planter box in a greenhouse. The roots don't go down because they don't like the soil that they've been put into. So they stay to the surface and they spread out a little bit towards the surface. Then they have more problems with waterlogging, more problems with heat stress. And so what you see now, it wasn't such a problem 20 years ago when we didn't have as much dryness. But what you see now is they drop the leaves over the bunches, the basal leaves, and then they get burning, or they preempt and they remove all the bunches over the leaves over the bunches in anticipation. And there's advantages to doing that. If you remove leaves over the bunches, you reduce your disease pressure, your pest pressure. But what you get is jammy, low acid, kind of less age-worthy wines. So as a grower, the thing we're looking for is a balance of air and light. I want to see splotches of shade and splotches of light on my bunches. And so when I take the time to wrap, I get that balance naturally. I don't have to go in and shoot thin, leaf pluck, but I get those dapple light on the bunches, so I get freshness, I get fruitiness. If I have too much shading, I get green characteristics and underripe flavors. If I have too much sun, I get that pruny, jammy kind of quality that is very associated with modern wines now. And to me, when someone asks me about climate change and how it's affecting us, the reality is that we can do a lot in our management to reduce the effects. And if you choose the right rootstock, you're going to feel the effects much less than what being reported. So I still don't have heat stress problems in our vineyards, even in hot years like 2011, 2017, because I chose the right rootstock and they go deep enough. If you think of places.
Michael, sorry to interrupt you, but we just have a question from Victoria. What is the rootstock that you use?
So my favorite is 110 Richter, which likes calcareous soils. It goes very deep.
Yeah.
What's commonly used is called 420A, which is, like I said, doesn't like waterlogging, doesn't like heat stress, doesn't like calcareous soil. This is a kind of a overview of the soils of Chianti Classico done by a wonderful Brenna Quigley. And she went and visited a lot of the estates in Chianti Classico, and she kind of rated them, tried to group them. So very hard soils, friable soils, unconsolidated, alluvial, tufa, Galestro, Alberese, and strongly calcareous to non-calcareous. Look what's the most calcareous and hardest stone in Chianti Classico, Pietraforte Monte Bernardi, which is the last wine you're going to taste tonight. The Saetta is on that. Also 30% of the Retromarcia. So we have very calcareous soils, very hard rocks, and yet we're using a rootstock that just doesn't like it. This is Pietraforte. I mean, that is extremely, it's according to Brenna, the most calcareous soil in Chianti Classico.
And Michael, we have a question here from Ruth Spivey. Is the popular is the popular French rootstock phylloxera resistant?
Yes, it is phylloxera resistant. It is a cross, so that's not an issue. But it just doesn't like our soils.
Okay.
So for 20 years, it worked out okay because it produced less vigor because the dryness wasn't so intense that it just produced low foliage, smaller bunches, looser bunches. But now they're really seeing the error of their ways planting with that rootstock. Whereas when I came here and I asked locals why they were using it, because on paper it made no sense whatsoever. The only thing they could say to me is, "Don't worry, Michael, it's what we all use." Couldn't get any reasons. And so I planted a 1/4 hectare with that 420A, Everything else I planted with 110 Richter. And to this day, almost 20 years later, the only vineyard that I want to pull out is the one that I planted on 428. Everything else is the same. Everything else is the same. So it makes a huge difference, and it makes a difference on how we understand the way wines are changing for the future. And a lot of it is decisions, not just the rootstock, but, you know, this is a classic Sangiovese bunch. You've got the main bunch and you've got the wing bunch. You can see the wing bunch is like a little bit less ripe than the main bunch. And so when I first came, I also was a little bit constricted by what I learned in school. And so I was like, well, we need to remove these wing bunches. It'll be better for quality. But what I realized about 2007 was that we are, even without dropping any bunches, we were getting about 5,000 bottles to the hectare. That's like 5 tons to the hectare without dropping any wings or bunches. That's pretty low. It's like 2.2 tons per acre or something like that. And so in 2007, I stopped dropping anything, wings, everything. And what I realized is that this is actually something that we should prize, because if this is giving me dark cherry or plum, this is giving me 1 or 2 spectrums behind it. So it's giving me complexity is the bottom line. It's giving me other flavors and aromas. And look at it in proportion. It's maybe 1/5 of the total weight of that bunch. It's not, you know, so I think it's the same thing with the optical sorting tables that is very fashionable right now.
Sure.
It's something that to me, you're sorting out complexity. You might get a denser, richer, intenser wine, but you're sorting out complexity. And that's the brilliance of the old school kind of thinking and philosophy. They would cry if you dropped a bunch in the 70s. You know, they kind of got used to these newfangled foreigners coming in and telling them they had to drop bunches, but so many stories of people crying when they were told to drop bunches or wings and stuff. It was just sad. And to me, the way I look at it now is the best sign of a grape grower is someone who can make wines with everything, like using the whole animal, let's say. If you pick only the best berries, which to me is one-dimensional, it's not only easy, but it's like picking 10 kilos out of the cow and saying, look at me, you know. It's not very challenging. It's not a skill. And so for me, it gives me a lot of satisfaction to use all of our fruit to make our wine. And like I said, we haven't dropped a bunch or a wing since 2007. But, you know, occasionally if we have mold, we would, and we're talking about, you know, max percentage of mold that we could have in a year is maybe 5%. We would sort it out in the vineyard and flick out the pieces in the vineyard. And usually it's a result of light brown apple moth laying its egg right in the middle of the bunch before the bunch closes. And instead of spraying pesticide or something, I see it as an acceptable loss. So we prefer to flick it out as opposed to spraying those and knocking out other beneficial insects. So.
And Michael, just going on from what you were just saying, I think you showed me the image on Friday of it where you really do use all the parts of the grape. I think I can see it below on the side. Is that the one which?
This is
how you really use every element of it.
So after we do our fermentation, we put it in this old school basket press. We have 2 of these, and to press off all of our vineyards, we fill them about 100 times each one of these presses, because it's quite a small press. But I press like an old farmer would, which means we don't give an ounce of humidity, meaning wine, to the distillery. We pressed over 3 bar. We never separate the pressings. We never fine. We never filter, because we love the quality of the tannins that are coming from our bunches, our stems, our seeds. So to me, there's no better tannin I can give my wine than the ones that come from my vineyards. And you can see there's stems here as well. I use proportion of stems from minimum would probably be 20%, and it could go up to 80, 90%, depending on the year. And that I also kind of think like a cook, chef, and based on my sensation of the year, I decide what percentage to use based on whether I think the acidity is higher because it was a cooler year and we have less natural tannins because we had less sun on the bunches, then I'll use more stems. In a warmer year where I have more natural tannins because of the sun exposure on the bunch and I have less natural acidity, I'll use less stems. Stems act as a natural deacidifier. They have lots of potassium in them. They attach to the tartaric acid in fermentation, and then they drop out some of the acidity. And then of course you get the natural tannins from the stems, just like the seeds and the skins. So yeah, I love that. And to me, that's a lost art too. Not only is it give me satisfaction not gifting the wine to the distillery and using the whole animal, let's say, but to me, it's a lost art that's so fundamental to age-worthy old school European wines. You know, we're starting to lose the savoriness, the length, and the ageability that comes naturally from the pressings, because people often reject their pressings because they don't like the quality. And it all comes back to the vineyard, the rootstock, the wrapping, all of those things influence whether you want to use it or not. I have never not wanted to use it. I've always pressed like that every single year. I didn't always use stems. Stems came in around 2010, and I started using them more and more, and really like the effect of that, and also long maceration on skins post fermentation. We could be 90 days post fermentation on skins, which I like. We call that alla Piemontese, and I learned that from, you know, basically if you leave the wine on the skins and stems for an extended period of time after fermentation, the tannins bind with each other. So when they're young, they're short, they're aggressive molecules. You feel them on your tongue. But as they start to bind with each other, they become longer, weightier, give more mouthfeel, but also are less aggressive. So I'm just kind of starting that kind of process in the fermentation, and then we build on that in the aging. And when we age, we primarily use Botti Grande. So this is almost a 6,000 liter Botti Grande, the biggest barrel we could fit in the winery. And,
I don't think it fits, to be fair.
Yeah,
it doesn't look like
just past a sheet of paper and that was about the tolerance. But you know, I started with Botti Grande from the beginning because I didn't want to use Barrique. I wanted to bring out the freshness and elegance. And what I learned from my favorite Montalcino producers and Barolo producers and Barbaresco producers were that there was something special about aging all of the wine together that brought out freshness in warmer areas like Montalcino. You know, the less oxygen you get, you kind of allow for that coming together of the tannins. So if I put my Sangiovese in small barrels, I get too much oxygen too quickly. It brings out fruit flavors and aromas, but the structure remains crude and raw. And so as a winemaker, then you're like, well, I want a bottle, but my tannins are too crude and raw, so maybe I should add Merlot, or maybe I should fine it. Whereas if you put it in a big barrel, you kind of allow those things to come out together at the same time. You allow the flavors and aromas to develop slower and give time for the structure to come together, just like we would in the vineyard, allow those tannins to ripen. So.
Michael, we're tasting the Retromat.
Yes, sorry, we should probably get this.
We know
I'm already tasting, to be fair.
I've got the perfect segue. We've had a question from Fabrizio, wondering if there's anything you'd like to say specifically about the 2018 vintage.
2018 was a wonderful vintage. I love it. It had the kind of profile that reminds me of I would say my classic cool climate kind of palette. And I love when we get classic years in our area, which surprisingly is still quite a lot of years. In fact, weirdly, almost all the even years are cool climate and the odd years are not cool climate. There's a few exceptions there, but in general, it tends to follow that line. So in my near 20 years. So 18 is in the cooler kind of aroma, the blacker cherry, less plum, the kind of freshness, but it just has, we say in Italian, un marcia in più, in respect to something like the 2016, which is also very special. But the 18 was just had all the right components and has a little bit more kind of tannin behind it, a little bit more elegance, but all those great classic perfumes that I love of classic Sangiovese.
This is stunning, absolutely beautiful.
Retromarcia is from our younger vineyards. Their average age of about 12 years. The oldest parcels are almost 20. It comes from all three of our soils. This is the classic one in your picture here. It's called Galestro. It's a purple-brown shale. It's also calcareous. This is Pietraforte, the one I showed before. This is Saetta with the Pietraforte. You can see how insanely rocky it is. Very reflective stone, the Pietraforte. We also have about 10% Alberese, which is also light and reflective as well. Retromarcia is all three. It also comes from all of the parcels. So it has west-facing, south-facing, east-facing vineyards. We don't have any north-facing vineyards, but that's a big advantage that Retromarcia has as well. It comes from all three soil types and all the aspects, which helps make a wine that is probably more generous and more approachable in its youth. The Reservas can be a bit more finicky and take more time because they're single vineyards. So Saetta is here, the sandstone Pietraforte. Monte Bernardi Reserva here. Singana is here. We're just starting to put little bits of Galestro, higher, older parts into the Monte Bernardi Reserva, but it's still pretty much this crew. Saetta is only here. So Saetta is 100% Sangiovese on the sandstone. I'm sorry, I know I'm going ahead of myself, but
no, I love it. It's amazing. I'm just very jealous we're not there.
Yeah.
Next year.
Because it's on the reflective stone, it's more structural and kind of more age-worthy. So in all of my old vineyards, I should say Monte Bernardi, Saetta, Zingana, they're all over 60-year-old vineyards now. And in the Saetta, I want to emphasize the structure, the minerality of the sandstone. So we do only 100% Sangiovese, even though there is Canaiolo here, Trebbiano, Malvasia. Whereas the Monte Bernardi is purely on the Galestro, and there I do Sangiovese and Canaiolo because I want to kind of emphasize the softness and the roundness of the Galestro that's not reflective. So that's an overview of the three soils and wines.
And Michael, there's another question in here from Vincent Gaznier, Soho House Chiconies. So he's asking whether your experience, the different work that you've done in Australia and other areas has helped you in your approach to wine and philosophy.
It has, sort of indirectly, in the sense that when I moved to Australia, I really loved the wines there. They were so varietal, so rich and easy to understand. And it was very important for the formation of my knowledge as a wine taster and producer. But towards the end of that 4-year experience, I started to realize that I was getting maybe palate fatigue for those kind of wines and that kind of richness and overly generous style. And so it was really good timing for me, because when I came to Monte Bernardi after that, I knew that I wanted to make more elegant, subtler wines that really reflected a place. Because one of the things I realized in Australia is they grow every single grape and they do it well, but there's no sense of culture, history, and kind of choice behind it. You know, when we say Sangiovese's been grown in Chianti Classico for, you know, over 1,000 years as Chianti and Chianti Classico, and even before that, it's essentially been chosen as the best match for our food and our local culture for all those years. And to me, that's very special. And I also think it's our job, if we want to be curators of such special areas with history and tradition like that, to really make the wines show their best of what they can do in that area. And so when I see neighbors making wines that are more intense and modern, more like wines that I knew in Australia, I feel like they don't understand their assets very well. They don't understand how special it is here. And the more you make a wine in that direction, I think the harder it is to sell your wine in the long run. I think it's a very short-term way of thinking about making wine and also valuing what you have. So.
That's beautiful. I have to admit, I'm cheeky. I've moved on to the second wine, and and it's absolutely beautiful as well. I mean, the first and the second are absolutely stunning as well.
Yeah, they've got a lovely pureness to them.
Yeah, so pure.
Thank you. Yeah. This picture shows the different soil types. The sandstone is orange here. The Galestro is blue. Pink is Alberese. So all this white is oak forest that surrounds Monte Bernardi, and then the major river, which is not so major, the Pesa, surrounds us as well. So it's a very special, unique microclimate. And then this is that belly button curve that we talked about. So the center of Classico. And then this is Fontodi right here. Fontodi is right next to us. On the next slope here is Castello di Rampolla. For those that know.
You have truffles in the oak forest.
Not so much truffles, but porcini. We actually we enjoyed a lot of porcini this year.
I settled for porcini.
Yeah. Chanterelles as well. We had a lot of chanterelles and macchia di vino mushrooms as well. Yeah, truffles rarely can be found in our area, but they're not so common. Not so common in our area. But yeah, porcini grow. I wouldn't say like weeds, but they grow in abundance. But usually,
what a weed to have.
Yeah, you see the little panda, little beater panda hunter car on the side of the road. You know that they're taking all his porcini that he can find. So, and you know it's time to go take a look as well.
And Michael, you're organic certified, just check I'm right on this. You're organic certified, but you're biodynamic in practice as well, aren't you?
Yes. So we, from day one, we started practicing organics and biodynamics, and we're certified organic. We never went the biodynamic certification because it's expensive. So Demeter requires you to get organically certified, then Demeter certified, and then they want 1% of your revenues. So it's something that never made sense. I checked in more recently and it's still the same way. So we still probably will continue just certified organic. But when I describe what we do, this is a good segue, thanks Emma, is that when we in the beginning, I used to use biodynamics as a way to describe us more often, but now I like to use kind of that we are more passionate about using the old practices. There's a lot of overlap there, and we use the biodynamic preparations, but the disconnect for me when I read Steiner or follow a more biodynamic route is that it doesn't really gel with the old farmer of this era. For example, the idea to pick on fruit and flower days or to not do something on root and leaf days, it's kind of ignorant to the time of those old farmers where all of these old practices come from. If I ask an old farmer if they use stinging nettle or chamomile or made teas, they say absolutely, but they didn't know biodynamics, of course, and they didn't have the luxury to not do things. They went from one job to the next. So when you harvested the grapes and started the fermentation, then you went into the fields and you sowed the fields, you picked the olives, you slaughtered the animals. You didn't have the luxury to say, oh, today we're not going to pick grapes because it's not the right phase of the moon. So for practicing it for a while, I've really moved more in that direction. And I feel like my basic decision in the end always comes to that kind of contadina gut check. It has to have a blend of being for quality, having an economic and a sensible pragmatic element to it. And in the end, it's always the right decision. It always works in the end. And the problem with a lot of biodynamic producers is they'll say, I don't know why it works, but it works.
Yeah.
And in the end, they don't really understand what it's doing. So this is us tying with the shoot of the willow tree, like the old farmer did. We don't use plastic, we don't use wire, we only tie with the shoot of the willow tree.
Michael, we've just had a question from Law Patry, Associating Group, and Honey Spencer, Panama Barbary Blue Posts. Just about Dementa, do you mean that you'll lose sort of 1% of your revenue, or is it 1% of overall revenue of any winery?
It's 1% of any winery of wine sales.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
No
Is
idea.
Demeter still good?
Obviously, in our industry, we don't really have a 1% to throw around.
Yeah.
Maybe if you're making
No idea.
some
It's
other
like-
products.
It sounds like a Cosa Nostra shakedown, frankly.
If we were making Barola prices, I think we could throw 1%. Maybe. But we actually pride ourselves on pricing ourselves very well. It's one of my core kind of philosophies. I don't want to make a birthday wine. I want to make a wine that people feels super happy to have in their cupboard or with their meal, that they're always like, why would I drink so and so when I can drink Monte Bernardi at that price? To me, that's way more satisfying than saying that I'm making the most expensive Chianti Classico. That doesn't interest me at all.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, your entry is always so important.
Yeah, of course.
And sometimes people try to make their entry wine too serious and try to impress. And Retromarcia is really about deliciousness. It's about enjoyment and finding the balance and elegance every year.
And Michael, just because we've got about 10-15 minutes left max. Do you mind also explaining the difference between the two Chianti Classico Reservas as well?
Yeah, I touched on it a little bit, but I should go into more detail. So as I said, Monte Bernardi Reserva, the 2017, which you have in your glass, it was planted in 1968, like the Saeta. It's the one that's across the street, this one here, and it's purely on the Galestro. So it's 95% Sangiovese, 5% Canaiolo. It's aged 2 years minimum in the Botti Grande, from 3,000 liter to 5,800 liter Botti Grande. And then it's in bottle for at least 3 months. Whereas Saetta, which is the one that comes from the curve here, is the one that's 100% Sangiovese on the sandstone soil, the Pietroforte. This one. That's 2 years in the Botti Grande as well, 3,000 liter barrels, because we don't make much more than that. It's about 4,000 liters a year. And the part that doesn't fit into 3,000 liter goes into 500 liter tonneau that I had Stuckinger make as well, which are twice as thick, so they give less oxygen than a normal tonneau. That ages for a year in the bottle after it's bottled, because it does have the more important structure, the minerality, and needs a little bit more time to come out of its shell. But we usually pick them on the same day. They ferment and age in the same way until bottle. Yeah, they're really lovely reflections of how much soil can make a difference in the final wine. So
just to be clear, Michael, the Retromarche is 100% Sangiovese.
Yep, that's right.
The Monte Bernardi Reserve is 95% Sangiovese and 5% Canaiolo.
Exactly. And the Saetta is 100%. Yep.
So we had a question from Natalia about that. That's right.
Yeah, Natalia Claret.
Yeah.
And there's also a question above that as well from, I'm just looking up.
From Victoria, yes.
About the grapes?
So yeah, so Victoria's asking, does Michael find that his wines reflect biodynamic days, the biodynamic days, such as on a more fruit forward day? Do you find it more fruit forward on a fruit day, more mineral on a root day?
Yeah, I'm kind of, I definitely think the wine is influenced, and I don't know if it's like our kind of body pressure and things around us, which would be similar kind of idea. When we're going to rack wine in the cellar, we wait for a descending moon. We do believe that the wine is less clear when it's on a rising, but I've definitely had feelings that it does affect, but in the end, I'm not sure if it's more my mood and my occasion and weather and things like that. Here in the area, we tend to say that that the weather can affect the taste of Sangiovese a lot. So rainy days, which tend to be lower aromatic pressure, can definitely make the wine seem a little bit shyer than a sunny day.
Yeah. We find that in London from time to time.
Yeah, it's but I definitely think there's aspects to it, but my kind of way, when I open a bottle of Monte Bernardi wines, I'll taste it, and if it's showing a little bit quieter than I know it to be, I just put the cork back in it and I drink it the next night. And I prefer that to decanting it, for example. Decanting I would do for sure in a restaurant if I felt that way. But if I have the luxury to wait for the next wine or next night, to me, when you decant, you get the air in, you open up aromas and flavors, but you don't get the second part that's almost more important for wines like mine, and that's when the tannins come together and help kind of fill out and smooth the wine a bit if it's showing a little bit shy. So I enjoy doing it that way, and then I'll pop open a Retromarche if the Monte Bernardi is showing a little shy, and that tends to always be showing well. So.
Michael, we've had a question from Andrea. He wonders what Canaiolo gives as a grape variety to the blend. I think you said something about smoothness, softness.
Yeah, it's a great question. Canaiolo is a variety that was very prized. In fact, if you read the book, a really lovely book on Chianti Classico by Bill Nesto and Fran Savino, they actually say that Canaiolo was the original grape of the area. And it is softer, more perfumed, and really cherry kind of notes. I love it. The problem is finding good clones of it these days. It's hard to find. For me, I can see aesthetically from the bunch if it's a good clone or not. The good clones look like a hand with fingers, kind of with bunches waving on them. If it looks more like a Sangiovese bunch, then it's not a good clone of Canaiolo. So.
And we have a question from Fabrizio. I don't want to talk just about vintage, but when I was in Chianti in 2017, it was a dry vintage. And how did you manage to make such fantastic quality wine?
Yeah, it was a hot vintage and dry vintage. Not as hard as 2011 was, even though it might have had hotter days potentially. But I think the period of time, and more importantly, what the nights were like, is the key for freshness. I think even though 17 was hot, we still had a really big drop in temperature at night. And then the other thing that really matters is when it shifts. And fortunately for us, being in the center, usually the last week of August and onwards is noticeably cooler than the summer weeks of heat. So that's very important. Right now I have fermentations that have not finished that I picked in late September, early October. Our tanks are 10 degrees and they're ticking along like a white in the Mosel or in the Rheingau. You know, they're going super slow, natural fermentation, and they're just ticking along super slow because we don't have temperature control.
And they're never fined nor filtered, are they?
Yeah, never added a product to our wine in 18 years, never a yeast, nothing, never fined.
So we had a question which I think you've answered, Michael. Deacidified or chaptalized?
Never, no.
I thought not.
My philosophy is our way to do it naturally, whether that is longer maceration on the skins, stems, and seeds, adding more stems, finding the right vessel to age it in, taking more time in the barrel or the bottle. To me, that's the more, I think it's the more natural way to do it, but it also shows in all the stages of the life of the wine that you made the right decision. You know, when you deacidify or you chaptalize, I think it can sometimes lead to disjointed kind of awkward stages that show in different life of the wine. So yeah, no. From my experience in Australia, my goal was to never use products because I had to mix them up in buckets and they were frankly disgusting. And things like that. And I didn't want to drink anything with those things in them consciously.
So you weren't drinking goon out there?
I don't know about it. What?
So you didn't drink any goon out there either, Michael?
Goon bags? Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, the bag and the goon Australian bag and box, the one with the fish
No,
product.
I didn't try. I'm sure I still drink stuff with products in them without knowing, but the idea to me of drinking it is revolting once you've mixed it and you know what it's like. But my main reason for not finding, filtering, adding products or deacidifying or anything like that is really it's so important for me to show the typicity of my place. And if I kind of soften any of those edges or add products or anything, to me, I'm shaving away layers of typicity. You know, to me, we're an area that makes cucina povera food, you know, the offcuts of the steak were a byproduct of the leather industry. And all of these great foods that we're known for are cucina povera food, and our wine was born to match that. And I think of our wines like that. And to me, the satisfaction of using the whole bunch and all the pressings and not fining and not filtering, to me, it not only shows more typicity, but it also gives more satisfaction as a wine producer and a grape grower.
Michael, that's a really good phrase, I think, to end up, because unfortunately we're getting towards time. Your wines certainly reflect Panzano and Monte Bernardi, and I wish we could be with you and eat some cucina povera, because that would be a good end to the evening.
Thank you.
Oh,
It's a pleasure.
I think there's a question that's just to throw it out, like, because it's come up twice now, just about whether you buy grapes. And
I'm glad that someone asked that. So if you look at the front of all three of those bottles, there's a very important statement on it. It says integralmente prodotto in imbottigliato.
Okay.
And that means we don't buy a kilo of grapes or a liter of wine. So all of the Monte Bernardi estate wines are 100% integralmente prodotto, and they have been since 2010. Retromarcia is the only one that we bought grapes for from 2006 to 2010. We always put it in our brochures and we always put it on our website. In fact, you can still find it to this day on our website. It says Retromarcia is 100% estate since 2010.
yeah,
We always said who it was and we always said when we bought it, because to me, that has to be black and white as well. I have a lot of commercial things that I do, and they'll say imbottigliato al origin, but they will never say integralmente prodotto. And for me, it is one or the other. So if it is a commercial negociant, it's 100%. It doesn't have any Monte Bernardi in it, but it has its own goals and characteristics of what I'm trying to do, like the Fiasco Uomino one. That is a very nice organic Chianti or Vino Rosso, the blend of the IGT Italia, as I like to call it, with the 3 regions of Italy. I have specific goals that I'm trying to achieve there, and criteria, but it's different. It's not biodynamic usually, because it unfortunately doesn't always manage to, it's very hard to find growers that will grow biodynamically, but it always has its own criteria. Whereas Monte Bernardi estate wines from 2010 and onwards are 100% integralmente prodotto.
And they're absolutely stunning. And I just want to add this one other comment, and then just his last comment that Vincent said earlier, where he just says, because he explains it so well, it is so inspiring and encouraging to taste such wonderful Chiantis from Classico to Reserva. Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's been
Pleasure.
a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for hosting.
Bye.